Hello everybody, it's me Rachel the Student Witch and welcome to a brand new series. I'm so excited. This series, as you can tell by the new playlist that I've created on my channel specifically for this series, is called Tarot Favorites. And specifically, this is the very first episode of the major favorites, and we are starting, of course, at the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. We are starting with the Fool. And so, as many of you guys know, unless you're new to the channel, I'm not necessarily a tarot tuber. My channel isn't just about tarot, but the tarot is a very important tool for me, and I do view it as a tool in my witchy, chaotic, spiritual path. It's a tool for enlightenment, gnosis, but also communication with the archetypes within myself, including my matron, Mama Creatrix. So keeping in mind that I am a chaos witch, self-proclaimed, and so I view belief as a tool. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. I'm super excited for this series, and I don't really know exactly what I'm going to say or where I'm going to go with each of these episodes. But basically, the general idea is that I will pick from the few decks that I have my favorite representation of each of the cards. And I'm going to start with the Major Arcana, do at least one video a month, hopefully, and then eventually do the Court cards, and then maybe the Minor Arcana cards, the pips. So I know this is going to take a long time. Even if I do just one video per month, it will take me nearly 2 years to do the Major Arcana alone. But hey, I mean, this is an ongoing process, you know, it's just a project I'm interested in. Yeah, so my deck collection isn't that big. I mean, I slowly but surely add decks to the collection. I have a couple on my wish list right now that I would love to get. And maybe if I want to revise a favorite video, if I find, for example, a new favorite Fool card, I might remake the video. Who knows? I guess it's kind of appropriate that we're starting with the Fool because I don't really know where this whole thing is going to go or exactly what I'm going to say. But maybe by the time we get to the Emperor, we'll have some more structure. But such a nerdy tarot joke. But anyhow, I do, in my collection, I have somewhere between 10 and 13 tarot decks, in addition to somewhere around 6 to 8 oracle decks. So my collection, compared to a lot of people's in the tarot YouTube universe, is very humble and small. But so you might see some decks repeat, but I think that's okay. Maybe you'll see some images that you've never seen before, or maybe this will give you kind of a sneak peek into a deck that's on your own wish list that you've been thinking about. Who knows? I'm just here to ramble and drink some tea. So speaking of tea, I am drinking, or waiting for the cup to cool down so I can drink it, a cup of this ginger green tea. So every episode I will mention the tea that I'm drinking. And I also pulled out this beautiful clear quartz crystal. His name is Gandalf. He's the only crystal that I own that I've actually named. It just makes sense to name him Gandalf. He's very wise. And I know Gandalf doesn't immediately scream fool to me. The hobbits do, definitely Bilbo. They have a fool energy to them. But I pulled out a clear quartz crystal because so many people work with clear quartz as not just kind of an amplifying and clarifying stone, but also a stone, and I've heard people say this in different videos. Somebody's yelling at their dog outside, I'm sorry. Distraction. But I've heard people say that even if you just own one crystal, they usually recommend clear quartz because you can charge it or kind of import any type of energy from any other type of crystal into it. So it's kind of a blank slate crystal. So I just pulled out clear quartz for that reason. I don't really work with it that way. Specifically Gandalf here. He's more of a wisdom and power stone for me. But it's an interesting idea of working with clear quartz in that way. So also when it comes to what to expect in each of these videos, I'll share my tea. If I pull out a crystal, I'll explain why. And then I'll also read just some general information and a description of the card of that particular episode from this book. This is the very first tarot book that I ever bought and read through. It's the Gnostic Tarot Mandalas for Spiritual Transformation by Lee Irwin, printed by US Games. I find this to be, I think it was a pretty decent tarot book. He does flip the swords and the wands in terms of their elemental associations. So I associate wands with fire and swords with air, like most people. I think most people. But he does the opposite. So swords is fire and wands is air. But that doesn't really bother me too much. But I really like the descriptions of the cards in this book, and that kind of leaning towards Gnosticism, because that is kind of the way that I approach tarot, as a tool for knowing thyself kind of thing, right? But I will also dive into the guidebook for the particular deck that I'm looking at for each episode. And so today we are looking at the Fool card in the Tarot Apocalypsis by Eric C. Dune and Kim Huggins. And my AC just kicked in, so you might hear some humming in the background. This deck, I got it on Amazon. It's widely available, and it comes in a really great kit with this beautiful hardcover box, and each of the major arcana comes with a full page color image of each card, and even the minor arcana come with colored images and a really lengthy and very, very well researched description of each card. I really, I mean, look at those footnotes. Oh, nerdgasm, there's footnotes. So I really like this deck. In general, my general thoughts on this deck, and let's get this over with before we dive into the specific card. One of the reasons I got this deck, and I got this about, probably 3 years ago, was because of the diversity, the different cultures and time periods represented in this deck. Now, it is not diverse in terms of age or ability or body shapes and sizes for the most part, because the images in the cards are so stylized. They're digital images. They kind of present to you based on the different cultures for each of the different suits, and each of the cultures represented in the different major arcana cards. They present to you kind of the idealized vision for the different gods, goddesses, and historical people as they themselves were represented by the cultures. So, for example, this is Justice, of course. It's the Egyptian Mot. And, you know, she's thin, curvy, almost, I dare say, sexy. But if you look at how the ancient Egyptians represented their pharaohs and queens and even gods and goddesses in their own art and statues, they were all stylized and represented the Egyptians' ideals for beauty and physical strength, and even representations of masculinity and femininity, with the exception of Akhenaten. I understand he's a separate case, but for the most part, all the pharaohs represented themselves as big, strong, manly men who conquered their enemies, and all the queens were represented as the ideal for feminine beauty according to Egyptian culture. So I kind of understand why the artists in this deck decided to kind of continue that idealized, stylized kind of imagery. Although here we have Demeter or Demeter, and she's an older woman, so there is some variety when it comes to age and stuff. Here's Temperance, represented by alchemy. But it is kind of over the top, and there's an extra card in here. I don't know if it's going to pop up, but the artwork is over the top, but I can handle it. I appreciate it. I kind of love it. Here's Hecate for the moon card, which is really great. So I really like this deck. So basically, when the diversity comes in the major arcana, you have cultures from all over the world represented. So this is the flood myth idea for judgment. This is Inuit shamanism for the hermit, and that's actually my favorite hermit card, so you'll see her again. Here you have Lakshmi as the Queen of Pentacles. So the Pentacle suit is represented by different historical and cultural figures and places from Southeast Asia, especially the different cultures that practice Hinduism and Buddhism throughout Southeast Asia. So this is Lakshmi as the Queen of Pentacles. And look, in one of her, I don't know if this is going to transfer well, but in one of her many arms, she's holding a baby and she's breastfeeding a baby. I love it. Yes, feed that baby. Whip out that titty. Breasts are more than just sexual objects for male consumption. God damn it. Anyway, and this, I can't remember the name of this goddess, but this is the Princess of Pentacles. So instead of pages and knights, they have princess and prince. So this is the Princess of Pentacles, and she's pregnant. Love it. A pregnant woman and a breastfeeding, multitasking woman in a tarot deck. I love it. So you have indigenous cultures and cultures from all over the world in the major arcana, including, as we're about to see, the Fool. And then the minor arcana, the Pentacles are Southeast Asia. The swords are represented by Norse myths and culture and history. The wands are ancient Egypt, and the cups are ancient Greece and Rome. So really interesting stuff. I highly recommend this deck. But first, let's go to a more general understanding of the Fool, and that's why I have a card that is familiar to probably 99.9999% of tarot enthusiasts and readers. The Rider-Waite-Smith. This is the Centennial edition of the Fool. So let's see what Lee Irwin in this book has to say about the Fool. And I'm not going to read the entire description because it's several pages, but there is a very interesting paragraph that kind of sums up the Fool for me. The Fool combines innocence with impulse, aspiration with untried exploration, hope with desire or longing, while plunging on occasion blindly into chaos. Such plunging is often necessary and unavoidable. No journey can be completed without some risk, some sense of testing and confrontation with the unknown. Mistakes are made, but the Fool does not turn back. Fools follow where the path leads. They link us with each of the other major arcana cards, with the imaginative, creative worlds of mystical visualizations and reflections on the archetypal imagery of world transformation. Spontaneous wisdom and folly combine to produce unexpected and amazing results, but only when the Fool is free to act in an intuitive and imaginative way, unconstrained by convention, and directed toward the higher synthesis of wisdom, compassion, and will. Blindfolded, he looks within, sees the meditative and mystical worlds, explores, and is transformed. Ambivalence, ambiguity, and the cracks between the worlds are the resting places of fools, the places from which they suddenly appear and then disappear, often in opposing moods. Having no fixed goal, they never lose their way. Simplicity, faith, and saintliness combine with a raw edge of madness or visionary power that may overwhelm. There is no anonymity for the fool. Fools stand forth, unable to hide their light, brilliant and uneven, but lustrous nevertheless. Sorry. I love that little paragraph. It really just summarizes the fool in my own approach to it, this free spirit that is allowed to explore uninhibited, without the chains of socialization, and free from everything that we think we ought to be. The fool is free to explore, and it's an exploration that is simultaneously inward and outward. It's an inward journey that also is reflected in your outward journey throughout life. I love it. Okay, now to this description of the Fool. And in this deck, each of the cards come with a part toward the beginning in italics, and this part is usually presented as if the card is speaking directly to you, so it's in the first person. And then you have the mystery section, which goes into more depth about the cultural practice or figure that is being represented in the card, its history, and then eventually, since this is a tarot apocalypsis, and apocalypse means revelation, you have the revelation, and then if it appears reverse or its negative aspects. Right? So I'm just going to read the part in italics and then a couple short paragraphs toward the beginning, because I think that really summarizes and explains exactly how the Fool is being represented here. So I'm going to see if I can keep this within frame in the camera while I read it. At the beginning, it is the end. At the end, it is the beginning. The highest point is the lowest, but from the lowest, the highest might be attained. This is the path of the holy fool, the madman filled with the ecstasy of union. What wisdom is concealed in his insane words? What love hidden in the chaos of his whirling cloth and mind? Truly, God comes to us as the madman crying aloud in the streets, as the unutterable truth that spills from the tongue in the ululations and wild cries for its ineffability. You see me dance, you see the wilderness in my step, and only the whites of my eyes in my drunkenness, but you do not see the union in my heart, nor the indescribable peace in my soul. For I am not I. I is the trap that will hold you in this grave world. Knowing yourself is knowing only your tomb. Join my dance, let your head grow dizzy from the maddening spinning, drink deeply of the wine of the beloved, inhale the opiate of the divine breath that is all, and you shall be as the sacred fool. You shall know the ecstasy of union and liberation from the chains of I. You shall be crazy and holy, knocking as a madman at the door of the beloved. Only when you cannot think of I without thinking of God, when you turn your head in all directions and there is always God, will the door be opened to not you. And then there shall be one and all and nothing, and your days will be an eternity and a moment, all in the divine bliss of union. Oh. Anyway, okay, so the mystery. The Fool is as abstract and seemingly paradoxical as the final card of the major arcana, the World. Together they each are a beginning as well as an end, an instigation as well as a conclusion. As its name suggests, it is associated with foolish action, yet its presence in the lofty major arcana, and its imagery say otherwise. This foolishness manifests as divine foolishness, a sacred drunkenness, a mad ecstasy. This unity with Godhead is also a form of self-annihilation, in which the boundaries between I and not I are destroyed, leaving only the divine. This in itself becomes its own form of spiritual madness, as the mystic acts contrary to social convention, seeming crazy to those who do not understand. And just one more paragraph here. The Islamic, I'm going to butcher this, Mevlevi order of Sufi mysticism performs a practice that is aimed at achieving this state, the Sama ceremony. Initiation into the Sufi path means the surrender of will, the transformation of desire from self-centeredness to God-centeredness, a seeking not so much to escape from the self as to transcend or transmute self, and thus enter into timeless experience. The whirling dance of Sama has caused followers of this order to be known as whirling dervishes. A dervish is another term for an initiate of the Sufi path, though they are properly called, I don't speak Arabic, tasawwuf. The whirling is a form of dhikr, remembrance of Allah, which can bring about an altered state and ecstasy. Like the Fool, although the dance may look chaotic and physically exciting, it is actually a symptom of the ascent of the soul towards unity with the divine. The outward chaos conceals the inner peace. So, the whirling dervish. And let me see if I can zoom into our Fool image here. So, why is this my favorite representation of the Fool? There's many layers to my response to that question. First of all, just the one that's at the top of my head, altered states and the importance of altered states in spiritual development. I am not shy. I am pretty open about my past in exploring altered states. I have taken different substances to achieve different altered states. It's been many years now since I practiced with those substances, but at the time I truly didn't understand the purpose of it. I think a lot of Americans have a misunderstanding when it comes to altered states of consciousness, especially those that are achieved through the use of substances, entheogens, whatever you want to call them. A lot of people, at least in the West and in the United States, I think, believe that the altered state of consciousness is the end goal, whereas it's actually, once you kind of dive deeper into it and study more about the different mystical traditions and shamanism and all that kind of stuff, you understand that the altered state is, it's a pathway that allows you to explore existence beyond the limitations of self, right? And when I say the limitations of self, I'm talking about our own constructions of who we are and our own understanding of ourselves as beings that are somehow separate from the whole. I actually have a prayer that I say practically every morning. It's written down on a piece of paper on my altar. I'm looking at it right now. And that the purpose of that prayer is to help me remember that I'm more than just me. Right? I am my relationship with everything else, and I am part of the all-encompassing existence. And that my sense of individuality is a simple, thin veil. And at the moment of death, I believe, that veil drops. And true, unadulterated, uninhibited being with the all happens at death. And so while I'm still alive, I have this sense of individuality, which is important. I mean, there are different psychological diseases and phenomena that happen when you don't have a healthy sense of self. So it is very important, on the one hand, to have a healthy sense of individuality and self as someone or something that is separate from the whole. However, we need to balance that out with an understanding of ourselves as part of the greater whole. And that greater whole can be you're part of a family unit, or you're part of a community, or you're part of the universe and everything. I mean, there's different layers to that too. And so the Fool, specifically this representation of the Fool, speaks to those altered states of consciousness. And the altered state here is an excitatory state. I just finished reading a few weeks ago Condensed Chaos by Phil Hine. It's going to be part of my Witchy Studies series. In a few weeks I'll publish that video about chaos and chaos magic. But Condensed Chaos, Phil Hine talks about its excitatory states versus inhibitory states of altered consciousness, and reaching an altered state through the use of movement and dance and rhythm would be an excitatory state. And so this whirling dervish, this person spinning, and reaching that altered state of consciousness is then able to experience the divine without that veil of self getting in between. And that's just so fascinating to me. So that is one layer to that question as to why this is my favorite representation of this card. Another one is more of a has more to do with social justice and history. It's 2018 in the United States. Well, I live in the United States. And the current political powers that be and administration are extremely Islamophobic, in addition to being extremely racist, classist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and xenophobic. And so earlier this year, we, as a nation, I guess, or the administrations, the power that be, tried to pass different Muslim bans, right? They didn't want to call them Muslim bans at first, but that's what they were. And so to target Muslim populations and to equate the word Muslim with terrorist, it's unfortunately part of the right-wing American psyche, but it's also part of the European and the Western psyche in general, I would argue. I mean, this shit dates back to the Middle Ages. It dates back to the Crusades, right? The different wars over territory and influence that happened between the different Muslim powers and the different Christian powers in Europe and in North Africa and further east, right? And I mean, even nowadays, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and all the terrorism that's happening, it's just, if you ask me, I'm not a fan of monotheism in general, and I'm definitely not a fan of the Abrahamic God. And so the monotheistic Abrahamic God in its different forms, whether it's Islam or Christianity or Judaism, to believe that there is only one possible God and one possible interpretation of the universe means that anyone else who has a different interpretation or a different version of that God has to be an enemy, because their interpretation represents a threat to your claim to universality, right? And so I think that's part of the reason why the three major monotheistic religions today, the Abrahamic God in all of its forms, are constantly at war with each other. Because they're each presenting a different interpretation of that Abrahamic God, while also claiming that their interpretation is the only right one, right? And I know those are kind of like broad generalizations, but on a big picture kind of scale, that's just how it makes sense to me. However, that does not mean that we need to deprecate the cultural, linguistic, historical, and scientific and mathematical contributions that the different Muslim practice or Islam practicing cultures have contributed even to Western culture and to the world in general. I, as an undergraduate student, had the privilege to study abroad for a semester. It was in 2008, so it's been 10 years now. But I studied and lived in Spain for about 4 or 5 months for one semester. And I specifically studied mudejarismo, or arte mudejar, and mudejar art and architecture, specifically the art and architecture that developed in Spain as the different Islamic and Christian and Jewish cultures mixed and mingled and influenced each other. And so there was a very strong Muslim presence in Spain from the year 711 to 1492. And at one point, that presence was a full-blown caliphate, right? And so it was through Spain that a lot of ancient Greek philosophical texts entered into Europe. It was through the Muslim caliphate and Muslim populations in Spain that it's through them and thanks to them that we actually have access to those ancient Greek texts, philosophical texts from Aristotle and Plato, and the works about Socrates and stuff like that. Because a lot of those texts were destroyed when the library in Alexandria burnt down or was destroyed. And so it's so funny to me how Western Europe and its definition of itself as a civilization depends so much on those ancient Greek philosophical texts and plays and stuff. And yet we wouldn't have those and have had access to those if it weren't for the Arabic translations that were done in medieval Spain. And so Western Europe wouldn't be Western Europe without the Muslim presence in Spain and their contributions to philosophy, as well as the contributions of other Muslim groups to science and mathematics. I mean, the word algebra comes from Arabic, right? And if you've ever studied Spanish, not so much grammatically, but in terms of vocabulary, there's a pretty decent chunk of words that come from Arabic. Alfombra means rug, like a rug that you put on the floor. It comes from Arabic. Almohada means pillow, Arabic. Ajedrez means chess, like the game of chess, Arabic. I mean, there's so many. Alcázar, which is kind of a word for a fortress or castle, Arabic. There's such a strong cultural influence, and there have been so many wonderful contributions to not just Western or, just to global knowledge and cultures that have been done by people and cultures that believed in Islam and practiced different versions of Islam, and even the mystical traditions of Islam, like Sufism. And so I really think that those of us in the West, particularly the United States and Europe right now, we really need to work on disconnecting that false link, that false narrative that we've been taught to equate Muslim with terrorists, because it's Islamophobic and racist and colonialist on the one hand, and it's just disrespecting all the contributions that different Islamic cultures throughout the years have made to Western society and the world. And so I really, really appreciate that the very, very first card of this deck, the very first card of the Major Arcana, first and last, right, the Fool, being the 0 card, is a representation of Islamic mysticism in action. I think it's just so fascinating. It's pretty rare to see anything from different Muslim cultures being represented at all in any tarot deck. The only other example that I can think of is the Hip Chick Tarot. It portrays some women wearing hijabs, but that's about it. I mean, it's this and the Hip Chick Tarot, like a couple cards in that deck, and that's it. And I think that's terrible. So yeah, I really appreciate the mystical aspects to this card. I appreciate the social justice issues that come to my mind when I look at this card. It's just, it inspires so much, and you can really go deep into this portrayal of the Fool. And it's really beautiful. I mean, just aesthetically, like the pink with the deep purples, and here you have this person practicing this spinning to achieve connections with the all, with the beloved, with God, or whatever. On top of this pillar, it's almost like out of the void comes this being, right? It's just so great and so beautiful. So anyway, I think I've rambled for long enough about this card. I hope you enjoyed this. In a few weeks, in October, hopefully, I'll be doing the Magician. I can't even remember what deck I'm going to pick for the Magician. Yeah, I don't remember. But be on the lookout for that in October. I'm going to try to do one of these every month just to keep this series going. It's been really interesting. I really like having a more open format and just being able to ramble about different cards in the tarot, and having a specific series geared towards and focused on the tarot is really nice. So I think it's exactly what my channel's been missing. So anyhow, until next time, many blessings, and I hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments and thoughts below. What are your what's your favorite depiction of the Fool? And have you ever thought of the Fool in this way? I'm really interested to see what you guys have to say. So yeah, many blessings until next time. Adios.